I found a 2015 iMac on the side of the road just sitting there abandoned. It looked like it was in pretty rough condition as the chassis was covered in dust and scratches along with a detached screen. Of course I couldn't just leave it there. I mean, it's pretty rare to see an iMac just casually lying around on the street. The iMac seemed to have belonged to a shop which I can't leak the location of due to privacy reasons. I went to the shop and asked them why the iMac was just lying there, and apparently they used it for a POS system, which was pretty unusual. They said I was free to do anything with it, so I ended up settling on just taking it home since it gave away my previous 2014 iMac, and I could definitely do with another iMac. You really can't turn down the offer for a free iMac, and so the repair began. Once I got inside, I took a closer look and inspected the iMac. The screen was completely detached, literally just resting on the chassis with no glue or tape installed. This is scary considering the display could have literally just dropped on the way when I was bringing this back home. And the worst of all, the display was cracked. It also had these weird white dots and it was caked in dust, which probably indicated it wasn't used in a while. So after a bit of research with the serial number, I managed to find out what model of iMac this is. However, I can't confirm specs just yet until we hop into macOS. But it seems to be the 21.5 inch late 2015 iMac, and unfortunately everything is soldered from the CPU to the memory and only the SSD can be upgraded on this. These thin iMacs are an absolute pain in the butt to get into with the display being glued shut on. But since the display is completely detached from the chassis, that'll give us easy access into the internals. The displays themselves are absolutely stunning though. It's a 4K Retina display which offers some amazing clarity and some pretty vibrant colours. So we'll be sure to check that out once we get this thing repaired. But by the looks of it though, with the cracks, I doubt this display will hold on well, but let's see. So the main question is, does it turn on? Well, I plugged in my mouse and keyboard, put the plug in, and press the power button. Nothing. No fans, no chime, and no sign of life at all. I tried doing a PRAM and SMC reset, none of which worked. Clearly something was wrong inside the iMac. Now I've dealt with these thin iMacs before, which by the way are a pain to work with. And on these thin iMacs there's 4 diagnostic lights which usually indicate something, and the 4th light showed that the motherboard was indeed receiving power. So there's nothing wrong with the power supply unit, thank goodness for that. Alright, but I clearly needed to do further inspection. I checked for burn marks, corrosion, and even loose cables. I even went as far as resealing connectors, and that was exactly when I noticed the issue. Upon further inspection of the power supply, the cable of the power button was gone. This pretty much explained everything with why this thing wasn't turning on. But with the power button gone, there's no way for the system to receive a signal to power on. Well, what now? I went ahead and bought a replacement power button for $12, and while waiting for the replacement power button to arrive, I decided to take some time to give the iMac a much needed cleanup. I mean, after all, it was sitting on the side of the road for God knows how long now. It's time we address that display too. As we already know before, the display was cracked and was in pretty bad condition. Now considering replacement displays literally cost just as much as buying an iMac used off of eBay, I decided to keep the display since it didn't look that bad to a point where it was non-functioning. Now sure, it's not ideal, but if the display still works and I can get it looking decent, this iMac might just be usable with that display. This isn't good practice though, and I definitely recommend replacing the display if it's cracked. Now I ran down the display with some isopropyl and baby wipes, which did the job to get rid of those weird white spots on the display. This also should have gotten rid of any germs and grime on here. And with that, the display looks just as good as new despite the cracks, so I'll set that aside somewhere safe and soft. Okay, now as for the chassis of the iMac, there are loads of scratches near the Apple logo. We probably won't be able to get rid of those, but that's just a very minor cosmetic issue, nothing to worry about. I'll wipe that down with some wipes. There seemed to be tape residue at the top, so I used my iFixit scrubber and scrubbed the top off. Even though this is a really small contribution, I'd love to get this thing looking as clean and good looking as possible. And once I did that, I wiped down the entire back of the iMac for one final wipe. And there we have it. The back looks pretty good. Now let's take a look at the inside. Surprisingly, this thing wasn't actually too dusty. However, there was dust in areas like the fans and the top of the speakers. What's that? And would you look at that, our power button arrived. This is perfect timing because we're going to clean the speakers off first, and in order to install our new power button and SSD, we're going to need to remove that speaker. I gave the speaker a little scrub with the wipes. There wasn't much cleaning needed with these since they weren't that bad. Now for the fans, they were quite dusty, so I ended up using a kind of compressed air and blew out the little dust particles. Once done, I gave the iMac one full dust off before installing our upgrades with the compressed air. Perfect, the majority of the dust is now gone. Let's begin with the upgrades, starting off with our SSD. Now to perform this upgrade, you're going to need to remove the speaker and the fan out, which we've already thankfully done. You'll probably recognize this exact SSD from my HP SSD and Linux upgrade video. I put away the HP laptop and I took out the SSD from it since it still worked perfectly fine. Once again, it's a 256GB Patriot P120 SSD. It's reliable and works really well, so I'm going to go ahead and use that. Trust me, an SSD is going to be so much faster than the original hard drives that these things would come with, which are mad slow. Alright, now let's install that new power button. Removing the power button required me to use iFixit's eye opener to heat up the existing power button. But first, I needed to heat up the eye opener by placing it in the microwave. After heating it up, I let it sit on the bottom of the chassis to heat up the glue from the iMac power button. And after about 10 minutes of gentle pushing and prying, the old power button let loose. Perfect. Now that we've got that out of the way, we can place our new power button into place. I'm going to add some scotch tape on it so it stays in place. You could probably super glue it down, but unfortunately I don't have that, but the tape will do just fine. Alright, now I'm going to go ahead and tug the power cable back into the wedge of the speaker where it was originally meant to lie. And then I'm going to plug it into the power supply. I'll also screw in the speaker. And with that, the iMac has been restored. Well, almost. There is one more thing we need to fix. But before we resolve that, let's see if the iMac turns on with that new power button installed. And let's check if that display works. I went ahead and pressed the power button with my fingers crossed. And would you look at that? It sprung to life this time. We can safely say the iMac works. We'll need to install macOS of course, but we will do that in a second. We need to fix that display. We can't really do much with the cracks, but we should definitely tape up the sides so the glass doesn't go into anybody's fingers when it's being picked up. Now that certainly looks a lot better. We can't do anything about the large crack in the centre unfortunately, so we'll have to leave that as is. Now that we've fixed up the display, we can install it back onto the chassis. Now please don't flame me for this, but I'm gonna have to use the scotch tape. I unfortunately don't have the adhesive strips you're meant to use with these, but it'll work perfectly fine for this. And with that, we've transformed what was once a somewhat faulty iMac into a fully working iMac. Now let's go ahead and install macOS and check out performance. I'm going with the original version of macOS this thing came with, that being macOS El Capitan. I could upgrade this thing to Monterey, but to keep things short, we'll stick with El Capitan. As we can see, our 240GB Patriot SSD is indeed showing up a disk utility. Let's go ahead and erase that. The install finished after about 15 minutes of waiting. About this Mac reports a 3.1GHz Intel Core i5, 8GB of memory, and the Intel Iris Pro 6200 graphics. That is actually a very decent iGPU. With El Capitan's limited application support, I was very limited with what I could do. I can confirm, however, YouTube played videos back very well. Overall web use was very smooth. Today, we're going to be taking a look at Apple's infamous trash can Mac Pro, also known as the 23rd. And with that, we can conclude. If you liked what you saw there, definitely consider subscribing and liking the video. This restoration has been very fun. Feel free to join the Discord server too. And with that, I'll see you guys in my next video. Bye bye!